Welcome to today's episode of Two Pigs in a Pod, a podcast for the people of Glazing by the people of Glazing. I'm George Lewis, your host, and I'm delighted to finally welcome onto the show today Chris Hall. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi, George. Yeah, sorry for the delay, first of all.
No, absolute pleasure to get you on. So, as we always do with our first question is for people to introduce themselves and what they do in our industry.
Okay. Hi, George. Thanks for having me. So my name's Chris. I'm the head of marketing at Gap. For those that don't know Gap, we are a manufacturer, a stockist, a distributor of both PVC and aluminium building products. Been going over 30 years. Got 108 depots all over the country, all the way from Inverness all the way down to Launceston, so pretty good coverage. We've got 1,000 team members, a lot of different brands, which hopefully many people have heard of. So from myself, I look after all the depots, the brands, websites, digital marketing, customers, print, and so on and so forth. So I suppose overall, it's a pretty evolved role, and certainly keeps me out of trouble on a daily basis. So yeah.
And speaking of keeping you out of trouble, you've been doing it for 20 years, as people might have seen on social media that you've recently celebrated your 20 years. So firstly, congratulations on all those years at Gap, and how does it feel to be celebrating 20 years at the business?
Well, yeah, I suppose it makes me feel old. I obviously spent most of my working life here, so it's a pretty sort of proud moment. 20 years is a long time anywhere, isn't it? You get less for prison sentences, don't you, sometimes? But it's a great set of customers. It's a great team here at Gap. And I'm proud to be in a company where lots of people have passed 20 years, lots of people have passed 30 years in honesty. So it's just a great business to work at. So I'm really proud to have spent 20 years. Just passed it a few weeks ago. So really good time in this aspect.
And as people might have seen on, like I said, on social media with your great post that got a lot of reaction, with your first day in the job, or your first few days in the job with your suit on and things like that. What do you remember about that first day?
Well, I was thinking about that recently, actually, because I think I suppose my first day in the job was pretty usual, really. Just coming to head office where I am at the moment in Blackburn, meeting my new bosses, my new colleagues, getting used to the setup, the desks, and so on and so forth. But I was thinking about this. It's probably my first week was the more unusual side of it, really. So on day two, the nature of the business here, we obviously deliver to a lot of customers. You're a stockist first and foremost, and I joined a driver from Gap Blackburn, and luckily he was on the way to Keswick, beautiful part of the world, up in the North Lakes for people that know it. And back then, Gap Blackburn used to deliver to North Lakes. It used to deliver to Morecambe, Blackpool, Fylde Coast, Preston, all the way across to Burnley. And obviously that model's changed now, but we used to sort of deliver quite a long way back in the day. And we went up to Keswick Superglaze. We were delivering sort of fascias and soffits and probably gutters. Probably back then lots of door panels. And that was an interesting sort of second day. And it's nice, we went to a customer called Keswick Superglaze, and 20 years later, they're still a customer.
Amazing,
which is great. But I suppose towards the end of the week, I was reminded about this again. When we took some customers to the fit show, and I got sent out on a placement to a customer of ours called Howth and Winard, and they were doing a big house, big roofline replacement. So I rocked up. I think it was in Standish or somewhere in the northwest. So I rocked up there, saw the house, and the house was kitted out in like loads of scaffolding. But it wasn't the scaffolding that we all associate with, extensions and new builds and so on. It was like easy deck stuff. I don't know if you know that, George, but it's like the stuff that you kind of roll up and secure.
Yeah.
And it's wobbly as hell, and I'm scared. And the guys basically said, "Go on, get up there," because I needed pictures and stuff like that, so I needed to go up. And scared stiff. And I suppose 20 years later, we took these guys to the fit show a few weeks ago, and they reminded me about it 20 years on. I haven't forgotten about it, so it's a good bit of banter. So they enjoy it. So,
and what was your first impressions of the? You had some good first impressions speaking to the customers that you still speak to now. But what was your first impressions of the sector as a whole?
Well, I suppose there's a lot of customers, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, isn't there? And yeah, it's a great industry, and yeah, I think it was really proud to join it really, and I suppose I haven't looked back.
And what originally drew you to the industry? Was there anything that sort of stood out that made you want to come into the industry?
Well, so I left university, and obviously I didn't imagine I'd be joining the double glazing industry. But I suppose does anyone imagine they'd be joining the double glazing industry? And I suppose it was the owners during the interview obviously drew me to the industry. You could tell they were a great bunch of guys, really passionate about the industry, really
Yeah,
passionate about the business. And it's quite interesting, really, in terms of what drew me to the industry. Looking back, I was thinking of, like you generally get like sliding door moments, don't you, in terms of your career progression. And someone pointed out, I was wearing a black suit, a white shirt, and a pink tie, so completely off brand in the early days. And it's funny because I remember thinking back, when I joined Gap 20 years ago, I almost joined Johnson's of the dry cleaners. And if you look
all right,
back now, with that suit, and there's not many dry cleaners left anymore, so
yeah.
perhaps I made the right choice. So I think, looking back, it was quite an interesting time, really. So.
Yeah, and did you think then that obviously that it's always the plan to stay in a company for as long as possible, but did you ever see yourself being still here 20 years later?
I suppose not really. In marketing, sometimes you often change sort of industries. Go sort of agency side, customer side. So no, not especially. But I think getting involved in the business and the industry, working with colleagues. It's been quite a journey, really. So I've not really wanted to leave, really. So
Yeah, and you spoke about one project in your first week, but are there any other standout projects that you've sort of been a part of over the years that sort of come to mind?
Yeah, so obviously over 20 years, there's obviously lots of projects you get involved in on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis. But I think there's probably two that stand out, really. So I think when I first joined, we had a brand called Homeline, which was our roofline brand. I suppose when I joined, we were buying that product off someone else, and eventually we went on to make it ourselves. But all the literature, was good literature, but it was all geared towards specifiers and house builders and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So my first task by the owners was to sort of create Homeline and make it a real sort of homeowner brand. So that involved obviously building a load of sets. You can imagine with roofline, there's all sorts of different colours and variations and so on and so forth. So building all these sets, photographing all these products. And if you go back, this is how long ago it was. If you go back to like 2006, 2007, we were photographing products, cutting them out, so you could use them on websites and brochures and so on. And it seems Bobby basic now, doesn't it? And we all use CGI and so on and so forth now.
yeah,
But we were even taking like Flowplast, for example. We still trade with all these years later. And I don't even know Flowplast, but a big supplier of ours for roofline and drainage. But we were photographing their products, and there's like 500 products. They have like black, white, brown, caramel, which I think they had back then. And all the different variations. So there were like 500-600 pictures that we needed to cut out and all that type of stuff. But it just goes to show how the industry's changed over the years. And I suppose the other one I'm proud of in terms of is Rockdoor, really. So I suppose we did the industry's first app using augmented reality technology. And I remember getting involved in it. I was watching TV one night, and CSL Furnitures. I'm not 100% sure if CSL Furnitures are still around. But they obviously manufacture sofas, or they did manufacture
yeah,
sofas, and they were advertising on TV. And they had this app where you could basically take a picture of your living room and then superimpose a sofa on there. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. That would be really good for doors. So we set about doing it for doors. So homeowners could photograph their own house, or our customers could photograph the homeowner's house and then superimpose one of our doors on there, and without any fancy graphics and so on and so forth. It was just a big change. Everyone's got bloody door apps now, haven't they? And they're all linked to ordering systems now. So, but back all those years ago, it was quite a thing to get involved with. So it was
yeah.
good.
Nice. And do you feel like that technology, when it first came out, when you were first introducing it, what was the sort of the feedback like? Was this like, another world sort of thing?
I think it was revolutionary at the time. No one had it. And it just kind of took the industry to took our business to a next level, really, in terms of being able to show customers. You can have all these different styles of doors, superimpose them on your own house, and once you got the picture on your own house, you could swipe and change colours and change glass designs and so on and so forth. So, I think as an industry, we're obviously behind other industries, out there in terms of ITs and IT and infrastructure and so on. A lot of our customers, not so much nowadays, but they still faxes orders and scribbling on paper in terms of writing stuff. And as much as we can embrace online ordering and tech and ways forward and so on, our customers are still, we sell from everyone to like Taylor Wimpey and all those big house builders, but right the way through to sole traders, one man bands, scribbling their orders on a piece of paper to pass over to someone. So yeah.
Nice. And along with the hires, there's obviously, I'm sure there's been some challenges over the years. What are some of the challenges that you face and sort of how you've got through them?
Yeah. So I suppose vertical integration. From any business really, vertical integration is fantastic, isn't it? Where being able to manufacture the product all the way through to distribution is fantastic for anyone. But for a marketing team, it means a whole lot more work, because rather than buying off someone that gives you all the assets and the images and all that type of stuff, it means you've kind of got to go back to scratch, create all the images, whether it's a door or a roof line or a bifold, you've obviously got to create all the stuff in the literature to then obviously, to market, sell it and pass to customers and so on. But then, you've got the manufacturing side, we're also a stockist, in terms of you've got 108 depots all over the country. They change on a regular basis to keep them up to date and so on and so forth. And then, I suppose the final side, the size of Gap, we've probably got, I'll probably get this wrong, but it's got to be over sort of 200 vehicles in the group. So it's almost like a mini distribution fleet. So obviously keeping them, on brand and so on is fairly involved as well. So, and I suppose just the other one really is that stands out. It's probably more recent as well. SIG. So back in 2017, we acquired SIG Windows and SIG Building Plastics. So we had 45 depots and they had, I don't know, give or take 70. So they were bigger than us in terms of footprint and so on and so forth. So obviously it was quite a big challenge. So the first few years were obviously quite interesting in terms of new locations, crossovers of customers, crossovers of locations. Like we had two depots in Bolton for argument's sake when we didn't really need it. Different products, different cultures across the business, different IT systems. So there's no getting away from it. It was tough for a few years. First few years, the company learned a lot. I learned a lot personally, but we came through it, and it's obviously gone really well for us now, and obviously a great team behind it. So from adversity comes strength, really. So we've come out the other end, firing on all cylinders. So yeah, all good.
Nice. And speaking of that great team, I'm sure you've had a lot of team members, mentors and influencers over your years. Is there anyone you would like to sort of shout out as people that have really helped you in your 20-year career?
Yeah, so I would say the original Gap lot, really. There's obviously a lot of people at Gap that have been here 30 years. Yeah. So, there's two owners. There's Charles and Simon, Charles Greensmith and Simon Bird. I've worked with them closely over the last sort of 20 years. But I suppose as well, there's two others probably to give a shout out to. So a guy called Simi, who looks after all the sales here at Gap. He's been here for 30 years. Loads of people.
A PiGs regular as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. PiGs regular, yeah. So, and then Ches, a guy called Darren Chesney. Everyone's got surname or nicknames here in Gap. My name's Chris Horn. Everyone calls me Hawley, whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
But Ches is kind of more behind the scenes in terms of working with me. So, he's helped me a lot over the years, working on all manner of projects from, rock door all the way through to GLP doors as we are at the moment. So, big shout out. But I suppose it's also interesting to watch others in the industry, isn't it, in terms of not necessarily from a mentor point of view, but in terms of how the industry's changed, the disruptors in the industry, whether it's from a windows or an alley point of view or a door point of view or cylinders and so on and so forth. So I suppose that's been quite interesting over the years.
No. And, the question is on everyone's lips, we want to get people in the industry first of all and staying in the industry. But what's kept you at Gap for 20 years? What do you think that sort of stood out as reasons why you've stayed there for so long?
Yeah, well, I suppose I mentioned earlier on in terms, it's a great crew. They're all kind of Lancashire lads, and they love a bit of banter. I'm from Merseyside, so again, that kind of suits me in terms of that kind of that regionalness. So I suppose the desire to move forward as well. They're always looking for opportunities and different things to do and different things to manufacture, new depots to open, and so on and so forth. And there's also quite a few Evertonians here in head office, so that always helps as well. So.
And yeah, like you said, you've reached 20 years now, and you've gone from sort of a boy to a man as such. Being at Gap, would you like to be the next sort of the mentor that you spoke about before? People that have helped you. Would you be happy to take on that sort of the mantle for the next generation to hopefully reach 20 years and plus at Gap?
Well, yeah, I suppose I'm already doing that to an extent. Especially in marketing. So, probably I'm older than I look, so I don't know if I can say that. But it's constantly trying to keep up with change. From my point of view, personally, I've got industry knowledge, which is obvious in terms of being here 20 years. I know an awful lot of customers, an awful lot of suppliers. I know the sort of the product range really well. But then, as a marketing department, as a marketing team, there's constant evolution. When I first joined, I'm not entirely sure. Facebook was launched, certainly Instagram wasn't launched, and Pinterest and TikTok and God knows what else. So it's that evolution. Paid search, socials, as I said. So you need to sort of build a big, or a good younger team behind you. In some cases, well, I say younger, not in all cases, but a very talented young team behind me. But it's still, important that we consider the principles of marketing. So, my daughter's mortified that I've got a TikTok account. And whilst I don't use it too often, you obviously need to keep track of, what we're posting and so on and so forth. So
yeah, and speaking of that, how is marketing evolving? Generally speaking, and within the glazing sector, how is it evolving, and how are you sort of keeping up with it? Like you said, apart from getting your own TikTok page.
Well, yeah. I suppose it's obviously a lot more digital focused than it was, but we're still ploughing ahead, opening depots, creating more brands. Always looking at different materials. Obviously we're focused on PVC and aluminium, but what's around the corner. But I suppose that, in terms of how the role's going to change over the years, it's obviously more digital. It's a lot more. Even in the last since COVID, it's a lot more digital. And where I suppose since COVID, these types of things didn't exist, did they, in terms of podcasts? And, I spend my life on Teams meetings and so on and so forth. So, but, they're really good. We're embracing technology because, we've got a big footprint all over the country, 1,000 staff, stuff like this. Technology is massive. And talking to customers over Teams, it's not just, staff calls and so on. Rather than going to see customers, you can get much more done over Teams sometimes. So, all good, yeah.
Yeah, and do you think it's still important to sort of keep, the sort of the day to day, you can do Teams and stuff, but actually still important to get out there like you did at the sort of the start of your career and throughout it to actually see people in the flesh?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit more difficult the bigger you get. I used to do it a lot more in the early days, but we had some customers come up to Blackburn, a few weeks ago. A big operation down south, and they want help with their digital program. They want help with the showroom. They've got a big showroom. We've got lots of doors in there, lots of windows in there, lots of GRP doors in there. So they want help, bringing it to life. So sometimes, you can do that on a picture and you can do that on Teams, but sometimes you obviously need to go and meet the customer and support them as best you can. So there's obviously a mixture of both, isn't there, in terms of getting out there, getting out and about. And it's good to go out, isn't it, and see, you're not just, customers aren't, they all, I suppose, as much as you like to, they don't always just sole source, do they? So sometimes you get to see what the competition's up to as well. So getting out and about is helpful. So going to the fit show and stuff, is obviously important to see, what's new and in trend. But obviously going to customers as well, because obviously all the other reps are going into our customers as well. New doors, new cylinders, new roof line, I suppose whatever it may be, new brochures, new tech. So it's always good to get out and about.
Nice. And is there anything you sort of still want to sort of tick off the bucket list in terms of, your career, sort of big projects that you think, I'd love to get involved with that? Or is it just to keep, expanding like Gap are and be the center of that from a marketing point of view?
Well, I think, we're at 107 depots, 108. So obviously the plan is to keep on expanding, keep on opening depots. But, whether it'd be nice to have a depot in Europe one day. Whether that happens, I'm not entirely sure. We've got customers in Europe at the moment that we supply to. We used to supply to customers in Ireland when we acquired Everwhite back in the day. You're going back a long way here, but Everwhite in South Wales, they used to supply all over the country, and they had customers in Ireland. So we started supplying customers in Ireland. So you never know. One day, maybe get a depot in Europe. So I'm sure the team will be happy with that, because obviously my team go out and help with the depot merchandising, set it all up with our sort of building colleagues. So they'd love a trip over there. So having a Guinness rather than a coffee during the meeting would be quite nice.
Nice. And what advice would you sort of give to your younger self? You're starting out in at Gap. What advice that you've got over the years that you'd give to young Chris Hall?
So young Chris Hall, I like to think I'm still young Chris Hall.
Younger Chris Hall.
That's debatable, isn't it? Yeah. I suppose just enjoy it really, as you may never leave, because a lot of people say once you join the double glazing industry or the glazing industry, you'll never leave. But it's all about embracing it, isn't it? Moving forward. There's lots of characters, lots of entrepreneurs in the industry. Some people have done fantastic stuff. So it's full of great people. So I think just embrace it, and just stick with it. It's a great career. It's given me a great career. Lots of different memories. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great place to work.
Nice. And what's next for you? Celebrating 20 years. What's next on the agenda?
Well, more of the same, really. I suppose the joke that I'm still kind of in the same role as I was when I joined. But obviously, the business is dramatically growing. I think I joined when there were 7 depots, and now there's obviously just over 107. There's lots of different brands, but there's still large parts of the country we haven't got good coverage in. So lots of depot locations to go. I know the team here are working on always looking to sort of pinpoint where's next. There's a big pipeline of where we want to open, and we're trying to open 1 depot a month at the minute, sometimes 2 depots a month. So obviously there's a big sort of drive behind it. And I suppose I'm part of the senior leadership team here. So we're always sort of geared to look 5 years ahead. So from my point of view, whether that's as you said before, embracing more digital and doing different things and looking at different brands and so on. But from my colleagues in the team, as we get bigger, how do we cope with the growth? Whether it's more depots, distribution hubs, more vehicles, more manufacturing space, and so on and so forth. So what's next for me is hopefully more of the same, and hopefully there's the business has plans in place to grow. So hopefully I'll be on that journey and sort of do what I can to help.
Nice. And lastly, we asked it quite a lot on the podcast of our guests to describe the industry in 3 words. We all have sort of different ways of looking at the industry and feeling about the industry. So what's your 3 words?
So I suppose on this one, you kind of got to consider that our bread and butter here at Gap is being a stockist. We manufacture all these different products and so on and so forth. But we're a stockist first and foremost.
Yeah.
So we obviously do some inductions here at Gap, and I've been involved in some inductions recently. And I say banter, stock, and service. And
Nice.
Probably complete random ones to name, and I don't know if anyone else has named anything as random as these, but it would just go back and give a bit of context, really. So from a banter point of view, we're in the building trade. Repeat business is everything to us, really. Relationships are everything. Trust is everything. And, the customers that are coming in, want to enjoy themselves. They want to be served well. They want to keep on coming back. They want to laugh. They want a free coffee. They want to talk about the football, the rugby, or the cricket, whatever it is, whatever their sort of interest is. So banter is really important. And we always say stock as well. We're a stockist at trade. We stock loads of it. It's obviously expensive to carry lots of stock, but that's what we're known for. We want customers to come in, and collect what they want, and then obviously, get back onto the job. Rather, I suppose there's an element of, we can't carry everything, but we try and look at, what sells, carry as much as we can, all the popular sort of lines, the popular colours, and so on and so forth. But stock is what we're known for. It's what we're good at, and we'll always continue to be good at stock. And I suppose the last one, service. It's drilled into you. From day one here at Gap, it was drilled into me on my very first day. And I'm in marketing really, So whilst I touch the customer, I'm not not working in a depot, but I know they drill into supporting your customers and looking after them. If you look after customers, the customers will look after you, won't they, in terms of repeat business.
Yeah.
And I've always said, if you get these three things right, the banter, the stock, and the service, everything else kind of pales into insignificance, really. And I say that from a marketing point of view. We always look when we open a depot, who's nearby, is the competition nearby? Is there a Screwfix or a tool station nearby? Is there a Greggs nearby? We could have the best marketing campaign and stuff like that. But if you don't get the banter, the stock, and the service with the right team, everything else is kind of a bit of a waste of time. Well, not a waste of time, but it pales into insignificance in terms of getting the right team. So.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks very much for the main part of the podcast. We're going to move on to our quick fire question round now, which is if you've seen other episodes like you've seen, you'll know that they're just quick fire questions and one word, one sentence answers. So nice and easy stuff. So firstly, I'll say, do you prefer talking over email or by phone?
By phone, really. I always say that to my team: try and phone people. You get things over the line quicker. So yeah, if you can, not always. Email has its place, but phone ideally.
Nice. Are you a morning person or a night owl, or neither?
Well, I more towards the evening. I think I'm renowned here for never opening up the office, but very often locking up the office. So I think my team. We've got some that start in the morning, some that start towards the evening.
Yeah.
But I think the ideas. A lot of people say ideas come to you in the morning, but I think to me when the office goes quieter, the masses have left. The office is a lot quieter, so more of an evening person, really. And then it's tough to switch off in this industry, isn't it? Especially in marketing.
Absolutely,
so they're on my laptop. So.
Speaking of switching off, what's your favourite thing to do to unwind after work? If you're out late, what would you like doing, or a weekend?
Well, a couple of things really. I've got a golden retriever, so and I live luckily to live near the beach. So try and take him out as much as possible. He's a big dog, so obviously needs a lot of walking. And then I suppose like everyone else, it's all Netflix and stuff. And we've just finished Breaking Bad on the second cycle. So all good.
As good as the first time?
Probably better. I think sometimes when you watch things the second time, you appreciate them more. So, but it just kind of the queue builds bigger for everything else you want to watch, doesn't it? Because once you start series one, you've got to see it through. So
Nice. What's one thing you can't live without, either in a work sense or without outside of work?
Mobile phone, probably. Mobile phone, but just I suppose a lot of my job's social media, isn't it? So email, social media, Everton news, all that type of stuff. So yeah.
Nice. And lastly, to sort of bring it back to you, and what's the best bit of career advice that you've ever received, whether it be something to do, or something that you've taken with you through your 20 years.
I suppose going back to my dad, really, just always work hard, always be committed, always show loyalty, and then if you're talented enough and diligent enough, success will come. So he's always mentioned that to me. I think he always said to me, he's going back. He used to be a bank manager a long time ago, so he always said to me, never wear white socks with a black suit, even though I wore a pink tie. I think he'd turn in his grave over that. And a good, strong, handshake. So. He's always said those types of things to me, and obviously just work hard. So.
Nice, yeah. Some good bits of advice there, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, for our last bit of the podcast, we always like to get our guests to give a shout out. I know you've already shouted out a couple of people, but yeah, is there anyone else, friends, family, sort of work colleagues or whatnot that you'd like to shout out to?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I was thinking about this. So obviously, you've got to shout out to all the colleagues that work with you in the business on a day-to-day basis. So there's probably 1,000 people that work here at Gap. So hi to everyone.
Yeah.
But I suppose this might be a random one for you, really. But I'm going to have a shout out to Sarah Ball.
Nice.
So I've just to give you a bit of context on that. So I've known Sarah since my first day at Gap, really, because she used to work for an agency called Michael Rigby Associates.
Yeah.
She was an account manager there, and obviously we used to use Michael Rigby's. When I first joined, so she's been super helpful since day one, and I suppose I've kept in touch with her ever since. Whether it's at the Fit Show or PiGs and so on and so forth. And funnily enough, I was thinking about this. She took me to my first ever PiGs do in London. it can't be far off, like 18, 19 years ago.
Yeah.
But I suppose back then, PiGs was slightly different to what it was now.
Yeah.
It was publicity in glazing, wasn't it,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
people in
Press and
glazing.
glazing. Yeah. Yeah.
It was all the old magazine editors, like John Cowie, Nathan Bushell, Mike Gannon, Ian McDougall. There's pretty loads, isn't there? And they were mixing with the PR people and the marketing people, and obviously some company owners. So it's obviously different to what it is now. It's obviously great to what it is now. Obviously it's grown and evolved over the years. But I suppose it's nice to see, PiGs become successful, and obviously, you can tell how well attended all these events are. So that's my shout out. So everyone in Gap and Sarah and Andy, obviously. So yeah, all good.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast. So yeah, thanks very much, Chris, for finally getting you on the podcast and to talk about your career and whatever else and everything in the middle and what's to come.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for having me, George.
Well, that's it for today. So I hope you can join us for another episode soon. You can find Chris's episode and all others on our YouTube channel at People in Glazing Society, available to download on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, and on our website, www.peopleingglazing.co.uk. Thanks again to Chris, and see you again soon.